Okay, let's get to our lesson. We want to work with inheritance. So inheritance is a part of our classes that will make life a little bit complicated for us, but I'll try and explain in the lesson and also give a good example. Inheritance. I'll try and give a good example of how inheritance works. Okay, so inheritance pretty much means the following. We'll have two separate classes that we can be able to use in our day-to-day running of things. Okay, so we can have a class mammal where we will have a public function. Okay, public, and then we want our function to be void, right, crawl. Okay, where we are saying this is an attribute of our mammal. So we want mammals that crawl, and see out will then give us what this mammal can do. So we are then saying at this particular point we create a class that is of type mammal, and the cout just would be can crawl, like that. Okay. At the same time, we would want one such or a different kind of animal that we can then maybe also create a class. So we can have a class, and then our class would be a goat. Okay, and then our goat will inherit from our mammal class. And it inherits in this manner, whereby we are saying we get our public mammal. Okay, this then creates our class, which is mammal, which is there, and then our inheritance comes in when we are then calling our mammal from its original class. So this is our base class. This is our derived class, whereby we're actually deriving something from an existing class. Okay, and at the same time now we can also make a public function as well, that would then be able to say void eating, for example, and then we can then say, I think this was what we did when we were still in the early ages of learning. I think we called it chewing the cud or something like that. Chewing the cud. Okay. So in other words, what we are then saying is we want to then use these elements within our main function. Okay. And we can simply do that in the following manner, whereby we can say mammal, rather we can let's actually use our goat. Right. And then our goat, we use G. Okay, and then we say G dot crawl, and g dot eat, like that. So the moment we have this, it's as good as we are saying we can now be able to actually reference these two, because you actually notice when I highlight, it actually tells me class goat, and class goat actually derives everything from a mammal. That's the first bit on line 24. And then if I highlight again, you actually then see my goat then gets its information from the mammal where it can actually crow. At the same time, our eating comes from the goat itself. So we're then just saying the goat can be able to actually eat because it's actually coming from the class. So in essence, we can say this is derived from the base class. And then, no, not this one. My mistake. It actually comes here. It's the crow that's actually derived from the mammal class. But this one is our original class that we have our normal eating. Okay, so this then helps us to learn and know what our classes are about. So let's just run it and see what it does. Although I feel we might need to have a lot more explanations on this, because it makes something that's a little bit complicated. There's this one thing that I'd actually not put into consideration. With the way we've actually put it, we've then now overloaded our functions, which then means we might need to fix our functions. Let's just try it this way. Okay, so we just needed to put the function parameters, and then now we can see what each function does. So the first function, which was can crow, it then gives us just that that output that it can crow. And then the next one, it tells us about chewing the cud, and then it tells us it is chewing the cud. So in essence, we have pretty much done our function inheritance in its simplest form. But with all that we've been doing, it has been a little bit difficult, because some of the things have not been in the same manner as what we are seeing here. So we would actually need to maybe get a bit more examples on our classes and how they can be inherited. And then at the same time, there is a protected and a private that we actually haven't looked at. That would then mean if we add those to our projects, it will give us slightly more complicated scenarios to work with, but would need also scenarios that we can then be able to say, this is a scenario that we've looked at and we can work on until we get a more sound understanding on how these work. Okay, so I had actually thought I would do a separate lesson, but I decided to join the lesson that's just finished with a new one on inheritance, and do it in a slightly different twist, where I will add to our inheritance, but in this particular case I'll be explaining how some of the things will be working, or how we can actually use some of the things that we'll see in a slightly different manner. Okay, so we can also do our inheritance this way. We can put a class, and then we can have a person as the name of the class. Okay, this class will then have the following. We want to put the following actions into our class, where now we want to have a public, okay, where our public will have the following. We want to have a standard, okay, and then we have 2 columns, and then we want a string, right? This string will then give us a value that we want to work with, okay? So let's say, for example, it's a username, and our username will then have 2 curly brackets and a semicolon. So what this then means is we want to have a declaration of a string that will be our username. At the same time, we also want to have a declaration again for our age, okay? So maybe we can say a user age, something like that, okay? So that we still use the user as we have used the user in the first instance, okay? So in this case, these are then our variables, okay, where our variable is declared this way. We are then going to be having a string for our username. We're then going to be having an integer for our user age. At the same time now, we then want to be able to initialize these values, okay? So to initialize the values, we'll then need to do the following, okay? We are then going to reference the class itself within the class to create a function, okay? So how do we then do that? We are then saying we have a person, and then this person does the following. We have a constant, and we have a standard, and then we have a string, okay? This constant and this standard and this string will then join with our ampersand, where we are then using the following, okay? It's as good as we are redeclaring these values. So we can have a name, or we have our name is equal to, we then give a name like John, and we also want to declare our integer, which will also get our age, which will be equal to 25, okay? After this, we then want to set these values, whereby we say our username will then get the content in brackets, which is our name, and our user age will then get the content in brackets, which is our age, okay? That way, we are then saying, here's how it's working. We have put a public access to our username and to our password. We have created a function that gets a constant value, which then means we can't change this value, a constant value of a string, and it gets a name. That name is what we get to call within our function, okay? Within our function, we then set the name to John. We then set the age to 25. And then outside of that, we can then be able to give a username and a user age so that we can be able to see what each of those values are, okay? So to then use this it's as good as a complete function that we have used. So we can say person, and we put P, okay, so that we can be able to reference that. And we can then simply put our C out, and our C out would then be P dot username and P dot user age end line, like that. If I have not made any mistakes, I should be able to see this, unless if I made an error. Let's just see. Okay. Okay, I think I made a mistake with the capital letter S. Okay, that was that. And it's telling us expected at the end of input. Okay, I think I missed one curly bracket. Okay, 1 second whilst to just reference the previous code. I think it was this one. Okay, yeah, I see what I made a mistake. I also need to put curly brackets like that. Okay, now I think I'm fine. Okay, so perfect. I did a good job. Okay, let's just correct that there, and I'll let you know where I messed up. It was my mistake. I think let me do it this way. Okay, perfect. So here's where I messed up. I just created my function without any brackets, so that's why it was giving me a problem. And also at the same time, I had also put a capital letter S, and that was then giving me issues. So let's run through this code again. We are simply saying we're creating a class called person, and this class is public. And when it's public, we can then use a standard string declaration where we call that a username, and this is a variable. We also have int a user age, which is also a variable that we are declaring, and then this becomes a function where in this function we just want to initialize our username, which is our name, and our age, which is the value of the age. And then the username and the name, we initialize them using the username that we've created in the previous class, and we pass them on into the function where we actually get the username and the age at the same time. When we then get into our main, we just simply call the class person, and if I highlight, you can then see it says person, and then our person is a constant, string, and an integer. And then this then is our class person that we'll then be able to reference using our p dot, okay, which still goes back to the class, and it gives us the values that we are seeing when we run the program. So when we run the program, we're then getting John and 25. So John is what we have put there, and 25 is the age that we have put, and that then sums our inheritance.